Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth.
I truly believe that thoughts are the greatest vehicle to change.
We do not care whether the cat is black or white, as long as it can catch mice.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favorite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
There is nothing permanent except change, is a quote from Greek philosopher Heraclitus, best known for his doctrine of change being central to the universe. I thought this was an apt quote for our guest today, in a period where we, as a society, are experiencing and witnessing change on a multitude of fronts. Our guest is at the helm of a leading organisation with 120 years of operations in Australia, in an industry that plays an important role across all facets of life. Our guest is Scott Wyatt, Chief Executive Officer of Viva Energy Australia, supplying a quarter of the country's liquid fuel energy requirements across different industries, and through an extensive network of 1,300 service stations throughout Australia. Following a long career with Shell in New Zealand, Australia and Singapore, Scott was appointed CEO of Viva Energy Australia in 2014. He is a director of the Australian Institute of Petroleum and previously served on the board of Viva Energy REIT. Hello and welcome to another episode of No Limitations, a show where we speak to elite world-class performing men and women and unlock the secrets and influences that have shaped their destinies and that you could apply to your own life. For our first-time listeners from all over the world, please don't forget to follow on your preferred podcast platform and share with your friends and colleagues. And for our listeners in France, New Zealand, and the Netherlands, a big hello. I am your host, Greg Robinson, Managing Partner of Blendon Partners, Executive Search and Board Advisory. Positioned in an industry vital to keeping the economy moving forward, from transport, mining, and manufacturing to everyday Australians just getting to work, Scott shares with us the rich history and evolution of Viva Energy and how they are positioning themselves for the future. He brings to the fore the significant role leadership plays in navigating uncertainty and addressing the challenges of our time, especially now as we embark on a monumental transition that will change the way we live. So sit back and enjoy a period of great change. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Scott, in 10 years' time, what's Viva Energy going to look like?
A lot different than it does today. One of the things I talk to my organisation about, given the industry that we're in, is that we've been around for an awful long time. And our business has been in Australia for 120 years now. And in that 120 years, actually, what we do today is pretty similar to what we did 120 years ago, fundamentally. You know, we take crude oil and we refine it and turn it into petrol, diesel, jet, and other products. And obviously, the way we go about it has changed quite a bit in that time. But fundamentally, that's still what we do, and obviously supply energy to people to get around and businesses to do what they do. But fast forward 10 years, it's going to change dramatically. You know, so the change in the next 10 years will be much more significant than the last 120 years. That's kind of the pace, I think, that we're heading into in terms of energy. We'll still be selling a lot of the products that we sell today in 10 years' time, because the transition will take to new energies take a long time, but it'll be fundamentally in play in the next decade. And obviously the challenge for our business is to how do we adapt to that and how do we play a meaningful role in that transition. That's top and front of my mind. And it's a challenge, but it's also an amazing opportunity as well. And you know, because of the business we're in and the relationships that we have with customers and the big role we play in people's lives, we actually can play a meaningful role in that transition. And that's what kind of excites me about the next decade.
And is it true something like 40% of all energy in this country is is actually oil? Is that
Yeah,
the
well,
fundamental?
so obviously coal and gas play a big role getting converted, or coal certainly getting converted into electricity, which is
Yep.
what the energy people will be familiar with, but fundamentally those are the sort of the energies that drive the economy. And so still a very meaningful part of that energy mix and very important to everything we do basically in the country, whether it's getting to school, going to work, going on holiday, operating businesses, mining,
Yep.
flying,
Yep.
marine, a whole range of different segments. Our products find their way into making things move, essentially.
Are we smart as a nation? We don't have a lot of refineries in this country. You got to look at sovereign risk, I guess. It's been debated a number of times, but from your expertise as someone who spent a lifetime in this sector, what are your general thoughts?
Look, I think the thing about energy is it requires a lot of planning. I mean, the energies that are created today have resulted from significant investments over a long period of time. And you make those investments with a long-term horizon. Most of our investment horizon is 10 to 20 years or beyond. And if you're in the upstream game and exploring, it's much longer than that. So having a very long-term, clear policy framework about where the country wants to go, which obviously gets driven by government. In an energy game, it's both federal and state governments that have a big role to play in that, is absolutely critical to getting the right outcomes, not for business, but for what the country needs in that time. Now, I think over the years, we've had actually across both sides of government very good, consistent energy policy frameworks. But with the rate of change now around energy transition and the different perspectives that people have around the pace that change needs to occur, I think some of that long-term planning has fallen away, and we find ourselves in a place that we'd probably rather we weren't as a country today. But where we find ourselves today all goes back to decisions that were made many years ago. So one of the challenges that government has is getting back in front of that policy framework, getting a clear view about where we want to be, how quickly we want to get there, the sorts of investments that need to go, and what's practical and realistic around this transition as well, and getting a clear agenda back in place with industry so that we can move forward in a more planned, sensible way and avoid the sorts of disruptions that we're seeing today, and certainly in the electricity and gas markets in Australia.
Well, we've got a new government, a new federal government in. What do you think they're going to play? Do you think they're going to be a little bit more engaging than the previous government?
Look, I mean, I found the previous government very engaging. I mean, we obviously went through some very challenging times through COVID in our business, and mostly revolving around the refining business. And if you can imagine, in the midst of COVID, suddenly you're not selling any jet fuel because planes aren't flying.
Yes.
You're selling half the amount of petrol that you sold before because people can't go to work or can't leave their houses. And you're trying to run a refinery that literally, the way it runs is it has to run flat out, but you've got nowhere to sell the products that it makes. You can't just suddenly stop making jet fuel or stop making gasoline or petrol because that's what comes out of a barrel of crude. Where do you put it? Suddenly your tanks are full up and you've got really hard choices to make about slowing down or shutting down your refinery, and that was a significant challenge for us through COVID. And right at the very beginning, certainly I was a pretty strong voice that this was going to be potentially the end of refinery sector in Australia if we couldn't find a way forward to sustain the losses that the sector would face through COVID and come out of it with a refinery sector still intact. And so that was a conversation that we had with the government of the day, and they were very receptive to that. And Minister Taylor particularly picked up that challenge and worked very closely with industry to try and protect or find a way to see a level of refinery capability maintained after the pandemic, recognising plays a pretty key role in the country's energy security. So, I think the previous government, certainly my experience, was very clear on the importance of energy, and particularly the role that we played. And I think I expect the current government to do exactly the same. And certainly we had really good dialogue with Labor through that period of time as well. The outcome that we got with government for the sector was very bipartisan, and I expect that to continue. And obviously there's challenges that have emerged more broadly, as I said before, around gas and electricity that the new government has to now navigate. But my sense is they understand the challenges, and hopefully that will result in some better policy frameworks going forward.
The prices at the bowser aren't low, are they?
No, they're high, and they've been sustained high for a long period of time. And obviously we've got an excise reduction that's got to come back in, so they could go higher again. And it's a massive impact on consumers, a massive impact on businesses. Couple that with rising gas and electricity prices, and energy costs are a real issue for the economy, I think, more generally.
Where do you think it's going to be in the next 3-4 years? And how much do you put down to Mr. Putin and the Russians?
I think a lot of it has been amplified with the conflict that's occurred in Ukraine and the disruption that's resulted in energy markets more generally. I mean, it's clearly still a very active conflict in country, but it's just as much an economic conflict. And in terms of economic, it's really an energy conflict. I mean, that's the game that's being played, and it's high stakes, and it's demonstrated, I think, to everybody, if you had any doubt, that energy security is absolutely fundamental to every country. The role that we play, in terms of my company plays in providing energy security, I'm really proud of that. And it was a bit why we fought so hard to retain the refinery capacity that we contribute to Australia's energy security.
I'm just watching the impact in the US at the moment. It's pretty staggering, isn't it? You see the prices and the inflation as a result. You're going to think that there's going to be some real rethinking later in the year when they have the vote again. What are your thoughts around the lessons we can learn from what Mr. Biden and the team are doing compared to what we could do here? Is there anything we can do, or we just, quite frankly, are receptive of the global play?
It depends on the energy you're talking about. I think certainly in terms of oil and the products that we sell, I mean, as a result of refinery closures progressively over years, and certainly two refineries closing through COVID, we're down to up to 80% of our requirements are now imported from overseas. So we are a price taker to what's happening within the world, the globe. We're dependent on overseas refinery for a large proportion of our fuel now. That's just the reality we face into. To put a positive spin on it, we still have 20% refining capacity in Australia, and that allows us to process, local indigenous crude. We process probably a third of our crude comes from local sources. So that's a level of self-sufficiency that gets inbuilt. Crude tends to come from different places than refined fuel. Refined fuel comes from overseas refinery. Crude oil, of course, comes from production fields around the region and around the world. So that diversity of supply gives you a bit more energy security. And so we've got to retain that capacity, in my view, and obviously we've committed with government to continue refining till mid-2028. It's a great outcome.
Saw that.
Great outcome for a business, but I think great outcome for the country as well. And as a result of that, we're going to invest in improving our processing capabilities. So I think that's all positive for at least retaining the sort of element of energy security that we contribute at the moment. Gas and electricity, it's a bit driven by what's happening globally and demand for, obviously strong demand for gas now, but it's also very much a local story too around where gas is in Australia, where it's consumed. There are different places. How do you move from one to the other? And obviously the interplay between gas and coal in electricity production as well. So I think there's a lot we can do in country to improve that situation. And the last couple of months have probably demonstrated the urgent need to do that.
Scott, for those out there who don't really understand or don't know a lot about Viva Energy, could you share some insight and maybe educate us all on what you guys do?
Viva Energy is essentially what was the Shell downstream business in Australia. So that includes a refinery at Geelong that processes crude oil and turns it into fuels like petrol and diesel and jet that we use. That supplies about half of Victoria's fuel requirements, to put it in context.
Okay.
We then have around 20 import terminals around the country that we import fuel from overseas, because the refinery doesn't supply all of our markets. And so those terminals are pretty much dotted around the coastline of Australia and allow us to supply virtually every part of the country with fuel. We operate the Shell branded retail network, which everyone will be very familiar with. We have about 700 sites there that are operated in partnership with Coles.
Okay.
And then we supply fuels and other hydrocarbon products like lubricants and solvents and bitumen to commercial customers in various different segments, the main ones being mining, aviation. We have presence at about 50 airports around the country. Marine, which includes container shipping and cruise liner business as well. Construction, which is predominantly supply of bitumen and hydrocarbon solvents, and road transport, so buses and trucks, etc. So pretty much every sector and commercial sector in Australia private motorists and a combination of imported products and fuels that we make here in Australia at the refinery. So supply about 25% of the country's liquid fuel requirements.
Right.
And it was a business that Shell had developed over 100 years, 100 plus years in Australia, one of the first oil companies to be here. They made a decision in 2014 to sell the downstream business. I mean, I started my career with Shell in New Zealand. Whilst I was working in Australia, they sold the business in New Zealand because they decided it was a market that had limited growth for them, and they had calls for the cash in other different parts of their business.
Yes.
Same sort of logic for Australia as well.
Yep.
At that stage, I was the head of downstream for Shell in Australia, so I was sort of on the sell side of that transaction.
Yes.
Which is a kind of an amazing time for me back in 2013, 2014, and trying to lead a business through divestment, which is hugely uncertain
Absolutely.
for people,
Yeah.
uncertain for me in terms of what my future was going to look like,
Yep.
my entire team, and obviously the whole organisation. But at the same time, sitting across the room from potential buyers and talking about the business and why it was a good business to buy. I actually, funnily enough, if you're reflecting back on it, I remember leading up to that, spending a lot of time trying to convince Shell not to sell the business in Australia because I felt so passionately about the future of the company, and it was the wrong decision for Shell to take. Looking back on it, with the opportunity that I've had since then to lead the business post-sale and do all the things we've done. I mean, I must have been crazy trying to convince them to do that because it's been a wonderful ride ever since. But that's how connected I was with the company. So I went through the sale process fully expecting, to be honest, to probably not have a job at the end of it because it was going to private owners. They'd bring someone else in and I'd go do something else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, through that process, got asked by the successful bidders for the business, which was a consortium led by Vitol, to stay on as a CEO, and which I did, and ran the business for them as a private company through till 2018 when we eventually listed the company. The Vitol consortium still has 45% of the shares. The other 55% are in public hands, and mostly with a small group of quite large hold investors, so very long-term supporters of the company, and got good relationships with them. And obviously the rest being retail and international. So if you think about my journey, and the company's journey really is moving from a part of a big global multinational, very successful company to private hands and then public ownership. That's the journey that we've been on. We still largely do what we have always done, but we've continued to add to the business, and we've got a strategy to take each of our businesses forward in different areas, partly around energy transition, just partly around continued diversification and growth. And that's a strategy that we've sort of developed over the last few years. And that's coming out of COVID. That's our real priority now, is getting on with that and really starting to play into a very exciting next 10 years, if you like, and taking the business in different directions.
And as a CEO, are you enjoying it in the listed environment?
It's different. I mean, I think I found the transition from multinational to private very different and very challenging, because it was a completely different environment for me. You were disconnecting our company here from the rest of the group, creating a really Australian-centric organisation.
Yep.
That required quite a lot of organisational change at the early days, which was necessary but very difficult, and getting to know new owners who, most private owners are quite involved. So, more involved than certainly I've been used to as being part of the Shell Group. But then taking it through to public, and then having the whole new set of stakeholders being other investors, and the general public profile that comes from running a public company. Another very different and challenging transition. But, my career, those sorts of times when you're feeling uncomfortable and a bit out of your depth in some ways, is the time where you really do grow the most, and because you're having to overcome those things, and the more you do it, the easier it gets, and the more you start to enjoy it. And every time, through all those changes, I took it with both hands and made the most of it, and have loved it. It's been a fabulous 10 years.
What do you think of the whole, I guess you've got a number of perspectives, but on renewables, and obviously it's the discussions day in and day out, and we're seeing all sorts of plays in that space, locally and internationally. Are we moving too fast? Are we moving at the right pace? You're an expert. What do you think?
There's nothing to stop us moving as quickly as possible in terms of creating renewable capability. So whether it's improving solar and wind-powered electricity generation, whether it's investing and progressing the development of hydrogen for, certainly in our case, we're focusing on heavy vehicles. But I think you want to push that as quickly as possible and invest in proven technologies that can deliver. I think there's nothing to stop us moving as quickly as we can on that. I think that's a good challenge, and I think it's good that people keep pushing companies like ours and others to move more quickly. But you have to also balance that with how quickly you turn off your existing energies as well. And if you turn off your existing energies more quickly than you're developing renewables, then it's not rocket science. You have problems, right?
Yeah,
and that's that's exactly where we're getting caught.
What about the affordability, Scott? Is it going to be affordable, or is that still going to take some time as well?
I think it depends on the technologies. I mean, obviously solar is becoming very affordable, but obviously needs to be balanced with, on-demand based supply. That's a bit where we get caught. Wind is a bit the same. Hydrogen has got some time to go, but I think has a clearly very strong potential, and with the level of support that it's getting from both government and large users, I think in time it will become competitive. And obviously it's one of those things, as you build scale and demand, costs come down. I mean, that's just the sort of natural cycle of these costs of investment. So fast forward for a decade, I'm sure it'll be a very competitive source of energy.
You reckon in a decade, do you?
We do. I mean, we think it'll take time. But in our business, I mean, we sort of see hydrogen as being particularly relevant for heavy vehicles. So what I mean by heavy vehicles is trucks and buses, where if you put a battery into those vehicles, they're heavy, so it has a payload impact.
Yes.
But B, it's very slow to charge. So if you're running a trucking business, you don't want your truck sitting around for hours on end waiting to be recharged, whereas hydrogen is still an electric vehicle, but instead of carrying a battery, you carry a cylinder with hydrogen, and that hydrogen gets converted back into electricity and water. And so that refueling experience is very similar to refueling for diesel or gas today. It's quick, and that provides the energy to run your electric truck or your electric bus. So it's really relevant in there, and that's kind of where we see it's also, we can play a role because we have the infrastructure on road to be able to reinstall at some of our service stations hydrogen capability, utilize the infrastructure and the network that customers already use, and make a transition from diesel to hydrogen for those heavy vehicles. And obviously during the transition from a customer perspective is, no one's going to switch entirely from diesel to hydrogen vehicles in one go. It's going to be progressive. So having a blended offer is another way that we can contribute to accelerating that transition and help in supporting customers and reducing their own emissions as well.
So in 10 years' time, if I pulled up to the service station, or one of your service stations, what am I going to be seeing?
You'll see a lot of what you see today. I think where the industry is going is you should see a more developed convenience offer. One of the things we learned through COVID is that there's actually a growing and strong demand for people to be able to shop more locally, not have to go to the big boxes, and they'll still do go to the big boxes and they'll buy online, but the ability to buy what they need more locally is growing. And our offerings at our service stations is still relatively limited. So I think that will expand and grow over time. People are going to be looking for options to recharge their electric vehicles. It won't be the primary place that they recharge their electric vehicles. They'll do that mostly at home or at the office or at the supermarkets. But when you get caught or you're on you're on a road trip, you want to be able to stop somewhere convenient. Obviously, our service stations will play a role in that. And I think for some of the main highway sites, at least anyway, where there's strong demand from trucking networks or trucking fleets, you'll see hydrogen as well in that time frame. So it's an evolution. You'll still see a lot of similarities to what you see today, but it'll be an evolving offer. That really leverages the strength that we have, which is the fact that we've got in our business, 1,300 service stations located pretty much not far from wherever you happen to be, and that's the convenience element of what we bring.
And if we take that sort of thinking, Scott, compared to other parts of the world, where does Australia sit? Are we ahead of the curve? We playing catch up? We're right on the money. What's your take?
In terms of that part of the business, the retail business, there's some pretty good offerings in Australia already. Our offering is not unsophisticated at all. I think it's certainly been very successful, but there's some more developed offers in our markets. Certainly in parts of Europe and the US, there's even more advanced convenience offerings. So I think we've got examples around the world of where this could head, our industry could head. But I think what is common across all of the different markets is that we're all making this transition to renewables. And how do you blend renewables into your traditional energies that you supply, and do that in a sensible way that's relevant for customers and still profitable and economic.
Where are you from originally?
Originally from New Zealand, so from Wellington.
Yep.
That's my home.
And what did Mum and Dad do?
So Dad was a surveyor, land surveyor, and I recall, as a kid growing up, many times out with Dad with the survey staff and helping him do his job a little bit. And so I've spent a lot of time seeing some of the workplaces that he used to work on. One of the sort of defining things, I think, in terms of Dad's career is he became quite senior in the organisation. He became partner. It was a partnership, and eventually he got to the point, and it must have been in his 40s, I suppose, where he got a bit frustrated with the politics of a partnership and made the decision to leave work and go and work for himself and do some property development, because obviously he'd learnt a lot about property over the years. So that was quite a big change, and it's certainly one of the things that I remember probably the most. It was that transition. Mum was always quite entrepreneurial. She was always trying to find ways to make things and make money, and she eventually opened up a chain of florists in Wellington. So they were both sort of working for themselves at that point in time. My girlfriend, then wife, ended up working in the florist business as well. So it became a bit of a family thing.
Yeah, okay.
and so it became quite an independent sort of family, I guess, and very sort of entrepreneurial in their own ways. And it must have been a bit of a life change, I guess, because around that time, or maybe shortly after all of that, but Mum and Dad bought a sort of lifestyle block. I think it was 50 or 100 acres, I can't remember, of land, and we all sort of became farmers just out of Wellington. And I spent most of my high school years and early university years living on the farm, and spending a lot of time putting fences up, planting trees, managing sheep and goats that we had. And I think one of the things which I talk about a lot with some of the grads that join the company today is one of the things that I was involved in with Mum and Dad was setting up a rabbit farm. It was kind of my idea. Mum and Dad had a lot to do with it, but we had a farm of about sort of a shed full of about 2,000 rabbits that we were growing for rabbit meat. And it was we used to had a licensed abattoir that got set up, and we used to sell them to restaurants in Wellington. It was one of the things that I was doing through my university career, and I joined Shell as a graduate shortly after finishing university. And when I was doing the interview with the recruiter, as we spent the entire time talking about this rabbit farm, and sort of walked out of there and had the job shortly after, because I was so amazed that it was such an entrepreneurial thing to do. So I talked to the grads about it today because it was my way of entering the company. Obviously, it's a little bit different today, but those sorts of experiences that I had, both working on the farm and getting involved in business at an early age, I think was a sort of a very formative part of my time in entering. Entering my career.
What are the takeaways? You're watching Mum and Dad doing their own business, long hours, hard work, a lot of risk, a lot of pressure.
Yeah, correct.
Everything's on the line.
Yeah, all of those things. I think it's kind of taught me that opportunities are what you create. They don't just get handed to you. You have to work for them, and you have to have the idea, and then you've got to follow through, and you're never that certain on the outcome, but you have to have some confidence in it, and it's what you make of it, right? And it's a work ethic that stayed with me throughout my career, and it's the same for my brother and sisters. My brother he's a property developer. My sister now owns a pretty successful furniture chain in Wellington, and my other sister works in that business as well. So that we've all sort of created, quite entrepreneurial careers. I'm probably the odd one out in the sense I've followed a corporate
what made
career.
You pursue that play?
It was a little bit all by accident, to be honest. I went to university unsure of what I was going to do, because we've been growing up a bit on a farm. I really enjoy being on the land.
Yep.
And I was looking to pursue a farming career and go and study farming at university, because that meant moving out of town. I was probably a bit conservative, and my mates weren't going the same way. I decided not to do that. Then was going to do biology. Then found out that was going to take 4 years instead of 3 years to do commerce, and there was a whole lot more contact hours. So I kind of went the lazy way and did commerce, and started working in different jobs through university, and really enjoyed enjoyed working. And actually, in my third year of university, started working for one of the utility companies full-time, and actually finished my last year a bit part-time. Sort of enjoyed it so much, but because it was a bureaucracy, it was a government-owned utility company, and got frustrated with the pace of things, and then ended up applying for a job one night, just getting frustrated with it, and it happened to be Shell, and happened to get that role and join the energy business essentially, and I just loved it. It's been the most amazing industry to be involved in the context of obviously the role that you play and the leverage that you have being in that industry, and so important to everybody's lives.
Absolutely.
But also the variety of jobs that you can do within it, because, you're talking about operations, supply chains, marketing, retailing, B2B sales. I mean, I've enjoyed an enormous range of jobs within the same company. And in reality, I've been now with the same company my entire career. So 35 years on, I went from Shell, had the opportunity to move across to Viva when the Shell sold the business, but really it's the same company for a lifer as they call it. But that's just the nature of the industry and that business, as it provides enough opportunities to really build that sort of career.
Well, it's a multinational, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And those dynamics, I guess.
I mean, I had a little bit of stint overseas with Singapore, but most of my time, and virtually all my career, was in Australia and New Zealand. So to the extent that Australia and New Zealand's international.
Yeah, but you're hearing from different points of view.
Yeah,
on a regular basis, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, and look, it's and I think Shell is a great organisation. I think one of the things that has kept me beyond the opportunities that I've had in that company has just been the people that I've worked with. I mean, it's quality people. My organisation, the legacy is the same people, and whilst it's been changed, I think the culture and the quality of people that work in the company is amazing, and that's what I get the biggest kick out of now later in my career is just seeing, being able to work with such talented people and see people grow in the company in the same way that experiences that I had as well. So,
yeah, but Scott, what do you reckon got you to the top? Obviously, the work ethic's one part. Putting your hand up, maybe taking on assignments others wouldn't. But what did you look back on and thinking, well, that was a good move. That was part of my DNA. What stood out, you reckon?
Like anyone's career, a lot of it at the end of the day is always a little bit accidental, right place, right time. But you make your opportunities, like I said before. I think, in my experience, the times that I have grown the most and developed, and also created the most opportunities for me, has been when I've been most uncomfortable. So the jobs where I've felt not necessarily ready, it's new, and I don't feel comfortable going into it. So I think one of the jobs earlier on in my career that would be probably the best example of that was when one of my bosses at the time gave me the opportunity to go and run one of our subsidiary companies. And, up to that point, I'd only ever led a team of half a dozen people. Yep. All of a sudden I was going into as the sort of general manager of that subsidiary organisation, with a team of like 300 people, which includes truck drivers and terminal managers and salespeople and finance, the whole gambit of a company essentially. And that transition was massive for me. But you're suddenly in the hot seat. But I had, I guess, the confidence that I would work it out, and of course that's what I did. And you make a number of mistakes along the way, and you look back on, you think, gee, I wouldn't do that again. But but that's all part of learning. And as long as you're reflective enough to look back on the mistakes you make and obviously learn from it, then you turn out a better leader and you come out of it and then more ready for the next opportunity. And I did that a number of times in my career, and I think that's a big part of where I've got to the opportunity that I've got today. And I think people saw that, right? And the example I gave you was a leader that saw that potential and gave me the opportunity and took a risk. And you've got to thank people that do that, right? And I always try and remember that with people that work for me, and they just, yes, they might not be ready, but if they've got the innate capability and you've got the confidence in them, give them a shot, right? What's the worst that can happen?
Last couple of years have been pretty tough. Like you said earlier on, a lot of thinking, reflection, sales down, people aren't driving their cars, not going to the shops. What'd you learn?
I learned a lot about myself and the company. I mean, everyone will have their own stories going into COVID, but I was in New Zealand at the time. It was really starting to develop. I was over there for some investor meetings and seeing family, and landed back in Australia. And as I landed back off the phone, and my phone was going mad because whilst I'd been in transit, Jacinda had shut the borders into New Zealand to all travellers. Yeah, and it was just like, it was thinking like this is so unreal. How could a prime minister do that? Particularly a country like New Zealand, so dependent on international visitors. And I was, staggered. And then by Sunday, Morrison had done the same thing to Australia. And of course, then you start to think, hell, this is real. What's this going to mean for our business?
Yep.
And then like almost overnight, you've got airlines grounding. As I was saying before, no one's buying jet fuel.
Yep.
Grand Prix was cancelled. That's probably one of the defining. I was going to the Grand
So
Prix.
was I, actually. Yeah, so was I.
and we had guests and everything. All of a sudden, that was gone. And of course, it developed very quickly.
Yep.
And obviously, I spoke before, we had obviously challenges around our refinery. But
so what's going through your head? And they suddenly realise, okay, engine 1 shut down, engine 2 shut down.
Yeah, and the share price halved, as most companies did. And there's the unknown. You don't know where it's going to go, but it's going to be bad. The question is obviously in my mind is, what's going to be the financial impact from this? What's going to be the impact on people? How are we going to manage the organisation through the next period of time? And you very quickly work out as CEO, if you had any other plans, you haven't got any other plans anymore. Your number one job is to see your organisation safely through what will be a difficult period of time. At that stage, you probably weren't thinking 2 years, but you're certainly thinking the rest of the year. Turned out to be much longer, and at times turned out to be more challenging than I thought it was, but also in many areas less challenging in the end. We sort of found a way through it, and probably wasn't quite as bad as what I was anticipating at the time. I've always found in our business, you often have some crisis or something in my career. And I think I always find you very quickly move into beyond worrying about what it means to actually just what steps can we take to see our way through this. And obviously you get people around you and you start to make plans. And then once you're making plans, you obviously get your confidence back and just pick your way through it. One of the things that drove me and constantly through that was just protecting our people and both from a physical sense in terms of health, but also an economic sense in keeping people employed. It was my number one goal was to not be faced with a situation where we had to let people go. Now we did have to let some people go in certainly the airports, but for the most part, even the refinery, the driver was to see people through and hold the team together through COVID, and that was kind of the number one driver. And we were able to do that economically and sensibly, and come out the back end as a result with an organisation I think has come through it really well, but I think really engaged with the organisation because of the way we managed it and the way we were transparently talking to people about the challenges, and also trying to help them with their own situations, because of course everyone was facing their own uncertainties, their own challenges through that. And I think the one things I kept reminding myself of through that time is that for every employee that's working for us, there's probably a partner that's working for someone else that could actually be impacted in some way and lose their job or have challenges that are much more different than what our employees are facing. So you've got to kind of, at a family level, it's not always what you see. There's a bit more behind the scenes. So trying to help people as much as possible through that time.
What changed in terms of your leadership style, Scott?
Transparency. I've always been pretty transparent. I think the great thing about our company is that, for all the leverage that we have and the role that we play in providing energy security, we do it for a very small number of people. Our total organisation is like 1,300 people, yet we supply 25% of the country's liquid fuel energy requirements. So it's an organisation that's large enough to do that, but small enough that you can actually know a lot of the people. And after 35 years, obviously, I know a lot of the people. So those relationships is part of what I enjoy working in the company, but it's also at times like through COVID that you can really use that because people, they know you, respect you, and if you're transparent about where the business is at, the uncertainty, don't have all the answers, but it's not looking great in these areas, and being transparent with people about how you're trying to deal with it, and giving people regular updates. It got us through that period of time, and I was absolutely more open and honest with people than probably I've ever been before. Not that I'm not honest, but I think we were just doing it more regularly and more timely and less, not worrying so much about the quality of the comms, just the regularity and being authentic with it, I think made a huge difference.
What about the investor community? How are you finding them?
A bit the same through that time as well. Yeah, I think it was challenging. It was challenging for us thinking about the refinery and what's the right answer, particularly when it was losing tens of millions of dollars a month.
I'll come to that in a second because that was pretty scary looking at that.
Yeah. So obviously investors worry about that too, and so working closely with them so they understood how we were thinking about it and managing it and keeping their confidence that we were doing the right things, I think was something that we also worked hard at. It wasn't that challenging. I think we had a very supportive investor base, which we're fortunate as a company. So and have been with us. A number of our investors have been with us for a long time, so that helped.
Well, you want to talk us through the energy hub and the thinking behind that?
Yeah, well, that was a COVID baby in some respects. I think when we faced into the challenges around refining quite early in the piece, because obviously demand dropped off very quickly. And so you kind of have this decision around, do we sort of flee from it or do we fight the problem? Because flee from it meaning let's give up and we should work to close the refinery because it's going to be so challenging. And it's going to.
So this is the Geelong refinery?
Yeah. So obviously that wasn't where I wanted to go. And so the alternative is let's fight this and let's think about not just the refinery, but what's the real asset we're trying to save here, and save because not just because of the people, but save because it actually has a role to play in the future of the company. The capability or the strengths that we have in Geelong is the location in terms of the ability to be able to bring energy into Victoria. We supply half of Victoria's energy already, so massive.
Yep.
It's well connected by pipelines and infrastructure into the rest of the state. Obviously, we've got 700 really capable people that work there and have years of experience. We've got 3 generations of families in some cases working at Geelong. So real history there and pride in what we do. And the thinking was then, well, actually, beyond refining, that can actually play a key role in broader areas of energy security and energy transition. So that birthed the idea of the hub and obviously the projects associated with that, which includes the gas import terminal.
Yep. You want to talk through?
Which is all about supporting, filling what is a growing gas deficit in the southern states, particularly Victoria, as the traditional gas fields dry up.
Yep.
And Geelong refinery has been built up off Bass Strait oil and gas. Historically, a lot of our oil came by pipeline from the Bass Strait. That's declined over the years. Gas is going the same way, and it's opening up quite a big shortfall, and we're seeing that play out in the short term today.
Yep.
So establishing the capability to bring gas from other parts of the country into Victoria in the same way that Europe's doing now, or looking to do to deal with the Russian gas supply, is bring gas into Europe from other parts of the world. Exactly the same sort of project, and help fill that emerging gas short. And Geelong has its own port, its own wharf literally right outside the refinery where we can build a floating regasification unit to bring that gas into the state. It's connected naturally directly into the main gas pipeline because Geelong refinery itself is a big user of gas. So there's a lot of synergies with what we do. And it's just a great example of how you can turn a problem into an opportunity by thinking a bit more broadly than the business that was under challenge at the time, and think about future opportunities for the site to just give it more diversity and more strength, resilience going forward. So we subsequently ended up working with government on strategic storage. So we're going to build some additional diesel storage at Geelong to support the government's desire to increase stocks in country. That's a more natural fit for us. But in terms of the transition, we do see gas as a transition fuel, and it's a transition from coal into renewables over time. It plays a really good bridging role in that regard. But in terms of more direct renewables, it's the starting point for our hydrogen refueling network.
Okay.
We're building hydrogen manufacturing or production capability at Geelong and a refueling station to support providing hydrogen to heavy vehicles, so buses and trucks around Geelong. We've created an ecosystem with customers and also truck manufacturers to actually create the whole ecosystem, so production, refueling, vehicles and customer demand around that site. It's the first in the country to do that. If successful, which I'm sure it will be, it'll sort of be the starting point of creating a network of refueling locations between Geelong and Sydney and then up to Brisbane on the major trucking routes in the country. So it's a good example of how we can start to make the transition even on a traditional site like Geelong. Handling hydrogen is something we do every day in a refinery. It's a core product that gets used within the refinery system. So it's something we know, and we can leverage that capability in terms of that early development of that project. So yeah, it really caught the imagination of the organisation. It helped people think about the future during some pretty difficult times through COVID, which I think was really important to try and get people to look beyond what we see today and think about where we could be.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the sort of projects that have developed have come from the organisation and from the people that work there. So it's certainly a legacy that I'll be particularly proud of, when I do finally hang up the boots, if you like, to look back and see the refinery at Geelong continuing to prosper and all these other projects come to fruition and create that sort of broader energy hub will be something that, I can look back on and say, well, I had a big part to play in that, and through difficult times come out of it with something really positive for the organisation and the community in Geelong.
What about fatigue, Scott? What did you learn about that during this period of time? I know it came up a lot in our discussions as a search firm. Board directors being fairly fatigued, CEOs working 24/7, everyone working pretty much 24/7 there at one stage. How did you deal with it, or who gave counsel to you?
I think because of the nature of the challenge, you kind of overcome that. I think I felt the fatigue at the end. So if there was an end, but certainly the back end of last year,
Yep.
I was starting to feel over it, and not just physically, but but mentally as well. I think during the heat of it, as you do through most crises, you find the energy that you need to get through it, and so that sustained me the challenge, but it helped me overcome what was actually quite an enduring period of time. And look, I think no doubt it was the same for my team as well. We haven't specifically spoken about it, but I know that everyone felt tired coming out of the back end of last year, and it was kind of good to be able to close the book on it a little bit and move forward and start to plan with more certainty and get back to reconnecting with people, which has been a big feature of this year. So
what's the spirit of the company now?
Oh, look, it's really positive. I mean, I think most companies that I've certainly dealt with, I think everyone's handled it actually pretty well.
Yeah.
Engagement, I think, has for most companies have gone up through that time because of the way companies have handled it. It's certainly been the case for our organisation. I think having this growth agenda and a vision for the future, which we were able to reset last year with investors and with the organisation, was really positive.
Seemed to be very well received too.
Yeah, no, I think people are excited about where we're heading. I think coming out of a difficult time, that's been a really important thing to do, is to be able to reset that with people. Now, no one, to be honest, I didn't expect to come out of one crisis and then enter straight into another in terms of the conflict in Ukraine. But that's the nature of the world at the moment, unfortunately.
You're up 7% last year, is that right, on sales?
Yes, it depends on the sector that you're in. So some sectors are still got a way to recover. Obviously, like aviation is still in a recovery mode.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
International's still a while to come. Retail markets are still well down.
Okay.
So people are, and that's just a factor of probably oil pricing, but also a factor of working from home. I mean, this is a transition that we're also having to try and make, as well as what's the right model to move forward with in terms of flexible working. With most companies I sit down with at the moment, that's what everyone's talking about, is like, how do I get people back to the offices, and how do I recreate the sort of the vibe that we had pre-COVID? That's hard to do if you haven't got people.
All right. Well, you're the CEO, so what's the answer? What are you guys doing?
I'm trying very hard to make it work and let the organisation evolve it a little bit rather than forcing people back. We know from our own polling that people are really enjoying the freedom and flexibility that comes from choosing when they work, where they work, and obviously how they work as well.
Getting the productivity?
We're getting the productivity. I mean, we're doing more today than we've done more in the last couple of years, to be honest, than we probably did before. So there'll be pockets where maybe that's not the case. But I think for the most part, I don't worry too much about that. I do worry about the cultural aspects, which most companies worry about, and the informal conversations that come when you've got people in a face-to-face setting. But to be frank, we had some of that before. I mean, I can remember pre-COVID and bumping into people on one side of the building that had never met people on the other side of the building. So it's not like that wasn't a problem previously. It's a different way. It's still a problem. It's just the solutions are perhaps slightly different. But I think to make it work, you've kind of, two things have to happen. You've got to really trust your people to be doing the right thing wherever they happen to work. We have built a lot of trust around that over the last couple of years. So I wouldn't want to erode that. I think that's been a really positive outcome for the company. And I think you've got to set an environment where people want to come back and work in the office from time, rather than being forced to come back. So if the employees see the value in coming back, and you create the environment where that is valuable to them, and they'll make those choices themselves without being told what to do. And if you can get that dynamic working well, I think that's a huge cultural benefit. It's a huge competitive advantage in a tight market when you're trying to recruit the best talent. If you can achieve everything you want to achieve as a business and provide that environment and that level of flexibility for people, you have a huge competitive advantage relative to companies that are forcing people to do things that might get people back to the office, but gets them there physically, not necessarily in spirit. So that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's what I would like to see happen. We'll let it evolve for a bit longer this year and see where we get to. But
yeah, look, what about the younger generation who've ambitious in their career? Are they coming back, or Is middle management coming back to take care of them as they come through? That's where I think it's been interesting to look at. Some of the young people are coming back, but middle management hasn't always turned up.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see where their responsibility is in that regard.
Yeah, you got this generational piece, and clearly flexible working means different things to people at different phases of their lives. Correct. And whether they've got kids at home and families, it just means different things. And but my experience so far in talking to some of the grads and young people, they're actually enjoying the flexibility as well. So they're not I don't get the sense that they're feeling like they're missing out, or that there's this huge desire to be working at the office more often than we are, and therefore, but in order to make that effective, they need more people there to actually get that impact. So, but that doesn't mean that doesn't exist. And I think you've got to get, it is a hybrid model that I think you've got to get to, and that's what we're trying to work to.
We've been talking about COVID, and you've talked about your last 2 years. What's leadership to you then?
I think what I learned, I mean, it's not nothing new, but I think what I learned from COVID is that, in any period of great change, is that people just want some predictability, someone they can trust, that's going to do the right thing or do the best they can to support people through whatever the change happens to be, and has a vision for where we're heading, and articulating that. And that was, I guess, the benefit of the level of frequency and transparency that we had, I think, played a really important role. And it's not rocket science; it's all pretty straightforward. But that's what people want, right? And I think you communicated more than you've ever communicated, I'm sure, haven't you? Yeah, I have. And I think one of the things that has changed for me in that time as a leader, and I think it's probably the same for a lot of leaders, is that because people have gone through so much change, because it's impacted people quite a bit personally, and because we've been so transparent and honest, talked about a lot of different issues with people, increasingly people are looking for CEOs to have a perspective on what's happening around the world. Okay. So, war breaks out in Ukraine. What do you think about it as a CEO? And I would always, we all have views, but they're not always views that I would go and share
in public.
Yep. But that's what people are looking for now. You're the leader of the company. What do you actually think about this? When I did write out about the war in Ukraine, and we had some connection with it, in the sense we had some cargoes of crude coming from Russia, and unfortunately, that's the way things happen. So we had something to say, and it was horrific, and I had my own personal views on that as well. And I expressed that early on to the organisation, told people what we're doing about the connections that we had with Russia at the time. I got an email back from one of our team saying, "Well, it's great that you're talking about what's happening in Ukraine, but what about my people?" And what he meant by my people was what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in Yemen, right? And you go, wow, I didn't even have that on my radar, and I probably haven't I've got views on that, but I wouldn't have even thought about expressing it. But it was really important to that person.
So what did you do? Did you express a view, or was it opening up a can of worms?
No, I mean, I obviously connected with that person and had a conversation around, just understand better about where it was coming from. And so I've had the opportunity with the earthquakes most recently in Afghanistan to talk about that in the context of just the broader issues around the world. So you learn from it, and you find the opportunity in a genuine way to not necessarily directly respond to that feedback, but it's part of recognizing that people don't just want to know what the company is doing or what the purpose of the company is. They want to actually understand the leaders better, and why should I work for what do you as a person think about things, because that's ultimately a big part of their lives, because you set the tone and you set the culture of the company. And that wasn't there to the same extent 2 or 3 years ago, that sort of expectation, I don't think. And that's come from being more open and people learning more about you, and they're having that thirst to understand a little bit more. It doesn't mean they agree with you. I think that's fine. And people won't. In the population of 1,400 people, there's going to be things I communicate that people won't agree with. But I think if you're doing it in a respectful way and it helps them understand who you are and what you stand for as a person, they can decide whether that's for them as an employee or not. But that's been a change for me in that time. And I think probably the other thing that's come out of it is just people's genuine acceptance of change has really evolved, I think, because people have lived through so much, things that you would never have thought would have happened. It's like my experience coming back from New Zealand and finding they shut the borders. I mean, that would never have happened. And then a whole bunch of other things happened that I thought never have happened as well. I think as a leader, we've got much more capability now to make more changes than we would have ever made before, because people are ready for it and they're used to the way you've talked about it and the way you go about it. So that's positive because we are going through the next 10 years, a period of massive change. So we need people to be ready for that. And I think that's been a good outcome.
Expenditure, consumers out there, they're all pretty excited about the future?
I don't think they're excited about the cost of petrol at the moment at all. And quite understandably, I mean, it's putting obviously significant pressures on probably people that can least afford it as well. And that's the global challenge. I think a lot of the impacts of Ukraine are big and impacting people heavily, but it's going to impact the poorest of the world the most. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we face over the next 12 months is how do you carry the poorest through this crisis and see them out the other side, and it's going to be very difficult. So in our own way in Australia, we'll have some of those challenges. Obviously, government has a role to play in that in terms of how they manage things like excise recovery and general support for cost of living. We obviously need to be mindful of that, but at the same time, in our business, we're operating in a global market and subject to what global prices are. So there's not a lot we can do as a company, but that's certainly something on my mind a lot is just that general inflationary pressures and cost of living, and how do we get through that over the next period of time in the most sensible way.
So what are you thinking, Scott? How bad is it going to be in the next 12 months?
I don't know. It's just so hard to predict. I mean, we've sort of come into this period since the end of February. Yeah. It's literally only been a few months, and it's already been a massive disruption, a massive change. Some of these inflationary pressures were already there as a result of COVID, but they've all been amplified as a result of the war in Ukraine. And it's how long does that go for? And even if it does find some sort of settlement, how long do the sanctions continue for? I think those are all unknown at this point in time. And it makes it hard from a planning point of view. I mean, we're spending a lot of our time now starting to think about scenarios and what ifs and how do we protect our business in terms of different situations. But it's difficult to know the answer.
Are we taking oil or gas from Russia at the moment?
No. So as
a nation, we've said no? Or?
Yeah, government put an embargo on. We acted before that in terms of the cargoes that we had coming and drew a line. There was no more purchases from Russia, and that's been the case since March. So
okay, a couple of goals. So what's going to happen with the relationship with Coles? One thing I was going to ask, and secondly, longer term, net zero emissions by 2030.
Yep,
achievable.
I'll start with that one. So. It's easily achievable for us. I mean, I think we talk about our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which is the emissions that we create as an organisation. And we said for our non-refining business that will be net zero by 2030. So that's retail and commercial and head offices and our terminals, etc. The refinery, we haven't set that time frame. We've said net zero across the whole business by 2050. And that's because the nature of the refining business is it's hugely emissions intensive. We need to see out the contract we've got for government to run the refinery for the next 10 years and then determine what the next 10 years looks like. And at some point there will be a transition of the refinery over that period between now and 2050 to be doing less of what it does today and repurposing it, if you like, into a more renewable focus. And that'll be the time to really address the direct emissions that come from that for that process. And I think that's sensible because if we were to no longer refine, which is probably the easiest way of obviously reducing your emissions, all you're doing is offshoring your emissions to another refinery overseas. So that makes no sense for anybody. Yes. So, but I think, look, in the scheme of our business, the biggest area of emissions is Scope 3. So that's the emissions that come from the products that we sell by far. And our Scope 3 emissions is essentially our customers' Scope 1 emissions. The real meaningful way that we can support reduction in emissions is actually working with our customers on new solutions like hydrogen to help them reduce their emissions. That's where we'll make the most impact, and that's where we need to continue to spend more time. So in terms of our commitments for our own emissions, I think that's actually relatively straightforward. The harder part is helping our customers meet theirs, and that's where we need to spend more and more of our time. Coles has been a great partner for a long time. We've been involved with them since we set up the alliance in 2003. So it's probably been one of the longest standing corporate partnerships, I think, in Australia, to be frank. And it's been served a really useful purpose where we focus on our core competency of selling fuel. They focus on theirs in terms of offering a convenience offer and obviously leveraging their broader supermarket capability. Fast forward the end of this decade, we do believe it's far more important for us to take control of all of the offerings across the site. And that means we've got to build the capability to do what they do today, but in doing that, then bring the fuel and convenience together and
Yes.
be able to really then take control and transition our business into something different. And we can't do that in the models that we're in at the moment. And there's just that end of the life cycle in terms of that partnership, and we need to find a way to and we need to take that back. And obviously we've set that up with them, with the contract ending in 2029. So there's a time horizon, and that will occur. But that's part of our transition for the retail business, right? So it's a really important part of our strategy, and obviously the relationship's still got some time to go, but we'll ultimately work together on that transition.
Bearing in mind what's happening in, I guess, geopolitics. So we've got, how many refineries have you got in this country?
2 now.
2. Are we smart in who we're partnering with externally in bringing in the necessary surplus?
In terms of in terms of the imports that we do?
The 80% that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think every company does that in their own way. Everyone has their own supply chains. We work with one of our shareholders, so Vitol is our supplier of all of our imported fuels and crudes. They are accountable for about 7% of the world's oil flow, so big trader.
Yep.
So that works well for us because they've got good scale, good presence in our market, which is the sort of Asia-Pac market, and can help us acquire the crude oil that we need and the refined products that we need. But they also bring a whole lot of experience around energies generally, and in their own way, their energy transition, because they're also embarking on a big energy transition journey for themselves. So a good partner. Other players in the market will buy directly from refineries or have their own trading teams up in the markets. And for the most part, most of our refined products come from close economic partners of Australia in any case, so Japan, Singapore, South Korea. So they're all strong economic partners of Australia. So I think in that sense, and answer your question, it's very sensible and I think quite safe supply chains. But having the diversity of imports and refineries is, I think, an important mix to have.
And as a nation, I guess, I'm just walking your thoughts on this. Joe Blow, the consumer out there, is paying a lot of money, as you said earlier, just for energy. Have we seriously got this right, or do we need to rethink this as a nation? We're sitting on some of the best energy opportunities in the world. We haven't even discussed the likes of uranium yet. Where do you think the dialogue is at the moment? Yeah,
look, I think we have obviously a huge level of natural resources in energy. So whether it's obviously certainly in hydrocarbons certainly with gas and coal, but most likely in renewables as well. I mean, the amount of solar that we have to create electricity or hydrogen, it's massive. We're very advantaged locationally in so many areas, and we should be using that absolutely to drive economic success within our world. And I think that's part of why, coming back to where we started this conversation, is why long-term strong energy policy is so critical to the nation. I mean, energy drives everything that we do, and it should be one of the most important policies that we spend time on. So, and you do need to look out beyond political terms.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
so just on that, we chop and change every 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there a documentation or a real strategy for the next 20, 30, 40
No, I think
years?
we used to have that.
Yeah.
When, to be honest, when renewables were less of a feature of it, and it was more traditional energies, and there certainly was strong policies framework that got largely handed from one side of government to the other and was consistent. And that's driven a lot of the investment that provides, the economic success we have today as a country. But that's lost a bit because the energy's got more fragmented and the debate has got very
polarizing in that sense.
Polarized.
Okay.
So big challenge for government is to try and bring that together, and I think try and do it in a bipartisan way that therefore you can develop policy frameworks that will survive the test of time. Exactly what we achieved with the refinery sector package. It was a bipartisan. It was supported on both sides of politics and provides absolute certainty now for the next decade. So if you can achieve that in the other areas of energy that are increasingly important to the country, then that will help drive, I think, a more sensible outcome and more success in the future and leverage the huge resources that we have.
So, Scott, what does the government need to do? What do they need to do to achieve this? Because you're talking about the growth of this country. We've got immigration we're going to bring back in. We're trying to encourage innovation. We're here non-stop. Maybe we could be, a hub for better technology, but you got to fund it and you got to turn the thing on.
Yeah.
But we haven't got the energy to do it, or it's costing us a fortune. That's going offshore tomorrow. So what does business need to do, or how is business going to get government to actually commit to something more than, the next election?
Well, I think business is very supportive of investing in renewables and making the transition. I mean, every company that we're involved with, either as suppliers or with customers, is absolutely focused on this. So I think in terms of tapping into momentum within business, it's absolutely absolutely there.
Okay, right. Okay.
But obviously, people want to know, if you start to make serious investments, you need to know what that
looks like.
There's some certainty around making that investment in terms of the environment that you're playing into. So starting to set some targets is a good thing, and transition to things like electric vehicles and what is going to be, what is the policy framework around supporting that actual transition, and then how do you do that, and how's that going to be managed at the same time as supporting the traditional energies so that the disruptions that we see today are minimised. I think that's the sort of, ultimately, there's big decisions that need to be taken around all of that.
Yep.
And obviously, government of the day can do that, but ideally you want it to know that the opposition is supportive of that going forward as well, so that you've got multi-parliamentary periods with some certainty in that. So I think it's not easy at all, because it's become so polarised, and no one wants to support the other's policies. So I think that's a big problem.
And if you look offshore, based on your international experience, who is doing that well? Like, which countries do you think are thinking 20, 30 years out and have drawn up the right, strategy and brought business on board?
I think there's very few, right? So that's the problem. Look what's happening in Europe. I mean, they've been caught out as well. Okay, different circumstances, but be massively caught out. It's not something unique to Australia, and I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much about it as well. And I think, unlike Europe, we can fall back though we have got the raw natural resources, and so we still have a strong foundation. It's just, how do we leverage that in a sensible way?
Yeah, but we give a lot of those natural resources away, don't we?
Yeah, but
we don't give them away.
We sell them. And so that's
and we buy them back.
Yes, in different forms. But yes, but we should celebrate that as well.
When you think about it, don't you think?
There's parts of that we should celebrate. We do have enough to supply not only our own needs but also the world, and it's a significant export earner for the country, and an important role that we play in supporting the world as well. And I think we've just got to get the balance right between home needs and international needs.
So bearing in mind where your company is at, and you're the leader of this company in one of the most interesting markets there is, in terms of innovation, how do you go about it? Do you have a team that you bring in, or do you bring in, do you have a innovation hub in that sense, or how do you stimulate that sort of thinking?
Yeah.
Because you're looking, like you're saying, you're looking a long way over the hill, big investment.
Yep. It's very hard to set strategy at the moment because it's so uncertain what you're playing into. And I find it one of the most complex challenges at the moment is, what's the right pathway to take going forward? And we're not a company that can take a single big bet on any one thing, right? Because if we get it wrong, it's like vending for the organisation. So we need to be doing a number of different things, but we also need to be making sure that they're sensible and that they're able to be commercialised and not just doing them because it sounds good and it resonates well for now, but it won't play well in the future because it's not actually going to deliver a commercial outcome. You've got to do both, and things like the example I gave before around setting a vision around, say, an energy hub, and then letting people work out what that means has been quite helpful, because there's a lot of
it's been well received, hasn't it?
People in the organisation do have ideas and they have a lot to contribute, and you provide enough of the vision to help them fill the dots in. And a number of things that we're working on at the moment have been organically developed by people in the organisation that have brought forward ideas, and we've found they've got legs, and we have supported them, and they may or may not come to fruition, but we'll certainly give them a good shot. Hydrogen refueling station is a great example of that. Yeah.
And as an investor, what am I wanting from you and the team?
Yeah, investors typically want two things. They see our business as a mature business, that as a mature business has the ability to deliver good cash returns to investors for relatively low levels of capital investment, because you've got the investment's already been made. So we are a strong cash generator, but at the same time they obviously see the need for us to also make the transition and participate in the transition to renewable energies, but do that in a sensible way where you are investing in the right areas in a balanced way, in a risk managed way, but absolutely contributing to that transition and not just sitting back and relaxing in strong cash returns.
On the renewables energy, is the pressure too hard out there at the moment? on people like yourself or on organisations like yourself? We're seeing stuff in the press. Recent times, AGL was an interesting one. Do you think it's been well thought through, or do you think it just that the market in general is just pushing it too hard and too fast? Or do you think we are going about it at the right tempo?
Is it too much? I don't know. I think the pressure should absolutely be there, though, because this is the, the energy transition is probably one of the biggest challenges facing the world today.
Yeah.
And I accept the need that we have, we need to move quickly because it will take longer than we think and longer than we hope potentially. And so I think that pressure should absolutely be brought to bear. I mean, that's our job, is to manage that. And so that pressure comes from investors, it comes from customers, it comes from employees. In my business, if I haven't got that sort of vision and not seen to be moving with pace, I will find it harder and harder to employ people.
Got to say, because it's all about purpose, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. People want to work for a company that has a purpose, and we have a purpose, but has meaningful plans to act on it. And energy transition is one of the key elements of that purpose for a lot of employees, particularly younger generation. And we need to, if we want to make that transition, we need to be employing younger people in the company that have the whole future ahead of them, and also the ideas and runway of their careers to actually go and deliver on it. And so if we don't do that, we'll just die. That's the reality. So
okay. And as a CEO, who do you bounce your ideas off? Because it's pretty lonely at the top, isn't it?
It's very lonely at the top at times. It's very... So I rely on my team a lot, right? So, I'm like any CEO, your exec team is absolutely critical to you. And obviously you get the opportunity to pick them. So you pick people that you know that will not just do their job, but add value to and support you and what you need from them. The board obviously is important. I mean, that's the key. And so obviously the relationship between CEO and chair has been well spoken about and absolutely critical. But the board more generally is really important. But on a day-to-day basis, that interaction you have with your team is key. I enjoy getting out and talking to, I really do enjoy getting out and talking to people deeper in the organisation as well. We have a pretty open organisation. People don't seem to be afraid to give feedback on what's going well and what's not going well. And they seem, for the most part, quite relaxed to tell me what they're thinking as well. So that really helps, it's another data point, but it really helps me as a leader and reflecting on how I can do better and what people are looking for as well from the company in terms of their careers and where the company can go. So now that we're back, it was a bit hard in the last couple of years, but now we're back out and about again. That's, I'm really enjoying getting back and doing that.
Okay, so we're coming out of that dark time of COVID. It's in the light of excitement and energy. And as you say, it's probably the biggest game in town at the moment.
Yeah.
What are you looking for in terms of people to join you? What's the sort of pedigree, the competencies, the drive, the ambition? As a CEO, what are you looking to surround yourself with?
So across the organisation, it's obviously different in different areas. I will say one thing I'm really worried about is the availability of skills in certain sectors, right? So, for example, we don't employ truck drivers ourselves, but we obviously rely heavily on trucking companies to deliver fuel to customers. Like the average age of truck drivers in our sector is 56. And every year it gets another year older, right? So at some point, unless something changes, there'll be no one driving trucks. And so this is a generational thing, right? So young people are not choosing to enter a career path. Yeah. Perhaps they don't need to because there's so many job opportunities around, but it's something, there are whole job skills, I guess, that are not as attractive to people as they used to be. And in terms of sustainability of our business, we absolutely need to overcome that. But then it's not just our sector, that's other sectors as well where you see that. So longer term, those sorts of things worry me. I think part of the solution is the work we all need to do on improving the representation of women across the workforce, because that's a whole population of employees that are just not working in some of the areas where we're really struggling. So that's just a natural place to look for a start. But it's also part of the work we need to do to bridge the gender pay gap and increase the representation across all levels and types of jobs across the company. And so that's an area that I certainly have quite a bit of passion for, and we're working quite hard in our organisation, but obviously beyond our organisation as well. And
how are you going in attracting?
We're going well. I think a good example is in our refinery. We have a big operator group in Geelong, sort of 200 operators that run the kit. That's predominantly being a male job. Very few women working in that part. Single digit percentages in that part of the business. We've been quite active in trying to make those jobs more attractive, make them more flexible to bring women into the organisation, and deliberately going out and seeking candidates, female candidates to come and join us. We're now at 25% representation, and it's a noticeable difference in, so 50 out of the 200 female workers, and it shows that if you're determined enough and you put enough time into it, you can achieve it. And they're great jobs, right? I mean, these are well-paid jobs. They're well-skilled. They'll build life skills beyond working for us if they choose to, and to be able to provide those opportunities and make them available to more women has been something I'm particularly proud of in terms of the work that we've done. But it's just one example, and there's a lot of work to be done in many other areas of our business and more broadly outside as well.
So for those out there listening, what is the most exciting, do you think, element in working in energy today then?
The transition is by far. And I think in the current climate, I think the role in providing energy security, it motivates me because I know how important it is to the economy and how important it is to people's lives. And I don't think people think about it because you take it for granted. You take it for granted there's going to be fuel in the service station when you fill up your car, when you turn the lights on, the lights are actually going to switch on. But making that happen there's a lot that goes into it. It's provided me a really rich career, and I think it provides exactly the same opportunities to new people joining the organisation, but amplified because it's going to change so dramatically in 10 years as well, and to be part of that change and helping to determine how we make an energy transition and how our company plays a role in that is, I think, incredibly exciting.
As you look at the world today, and it is a somewhat turmoil, what do you see for the Australian economy in the next 3-6 months, or maybe the next couple of years? Is it going to change a great deal?
I'm always confident and optimistic about the Australian economy. I think we have, as we touched on before, so many natural resources. I think a really confident population, some great innovation and entrepreneurs in the country as well. And so I think it's still a land of great opportunity. And I do believe we'll come out of the current challenges in good shape. We have come out of COVID in pretty good shape, despite what was, a bit bumpy ride compared to a lot of other countries around the world. I think we'll come out of the energy crisis or the Ukraine, there's sort of knock-on effects of a conflict in Ukraine, ultimately pretty well as well. And
you think so, do you?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think some of the challenges we're seeing in energy at the moment will be overcome. I think it's been a good wake-up call to the country and to politicians about how fragile our current energy system is. But I think we can overcome that as well, and I think with some sensible policies going forward. So come out of all of that and then hopefully feed into a world that's in recovery at some point in time, then we should benefit from that, I think. I think it's still a land of great opportunity, I think, and the fundamentals are pretty strong.
Now, Scott, if you're looking back at that young man who had that rabbit farm all those years ago, went into that interview and got that job as you walked out the front door, what advice would you, looking back at him right now, would you give him?
I would do exactly. There's a lot of things I would do differently in terms of things I've done through my career, but broadly, I feel very fortunate to have had the career that I've had, and I think the way it evolved, some of it, just accidentally, but I think has given me an enormous lot of, range of experiences and opportunities. And I think one of the things looking back that I always did was just take every opportunity that I was given, and trust the people that were giving them to me, that they knew a little bit about what they were doing. And so that saw me do different jobs, saw me move to different places in New Zealand and overseas. And that's all, not all of that was promotion. Some of it was just sideways moves or, different development opportunities. And I took every one and got the most out of it that I could. And I would do every single job that I've done over again through that career. And it's given me the opportunity I've got today to lead a company through most remarkable period of time. If you think about it, I went from being involved in a multinational company, having a whole career there, to then moving across as a CEO, working for private owners, and running a private company for a period of time, which is a very different environment than working in a multinational. And then doing something I've never done before in terms of listing the company in two parts, really, because we listed the service stations and then listed the operating company. Those are massive undertakings, and to be able to be involved in that, learn from that, and lead the company through it was a fabulous period of time. I wouldn't give up the last 10 years for anything. It's been fantastic.
Scott, it's been a real pleasure for you joining us today. Thank you very much for coming in.
No, thanks very much for having me. It's been great.
On that, you've been listening to No Limitations.